I want you to picture something for a second. Power goes out. Not your street. Everything. No gas pumps, no cell signal, no traffic lights. You walk out to your driveway, turn the key, and your truck fires right up. That's not a fantasy. That's what happens when you're driving the right truck. And that's exactly what we're talking about today. My name's Wade Tucker. I've been wrenching on trucks in East Tennessee for going on 32 years. I've seen every generation of truck come through this shop. And I'll tell you flat out, the guys who are quietly winning the used truck market right now are not buying new. They're buying old, specific old, and they're doing it on purpose. Today I'm giving you the full list, the real mechanical reasoning behind it, the documented price data that shows this isn't just a prepper fantasy. And I'll tell you exactly what to look for when you go shopping so you don't get burned. This is the no computer list. Let's get into it. If you're the kind of person who wants to understand trucks the right way, not the dealership way, hit that subscribe button right now. I put out content that actually teaches you something. No fluff, just real truck knowledge. Here's where this whole conversation starts. In 1996, the federal government mandated that every passenger vehicle and light truck sold in the United States had to comply with OBD2. That stands for Onboard Diagnostics, second generation. Every vehicle, no exceptions. That law changed everything about how trucks are built. Before 1996, manufacturers were doing their own thing. Some had early electronic fuel injection. Some had rudimentary engine management systems. But there was no federal standard requiring a universal diagnostic port, no requirement for a central ECU controlling every major engine function. What you had was variety, and a whole lot of mechanically simple trucks that any decent wrench turner could fix in a driveway. After 1996, the complexity went up fast. The ECU started controlling fuel delivery, ignition timing, emission systems, and eventually transmission functions. By the early 2000s, you couldn't tune an idle without a laptop. That's not an exaggeration, that's just how it went. So the pre-1996 cutoff isn't arbitrary. It's a real legal and engineering dividing line. Everything before that date was built in an era where a truck had to be repairable by a human being with hand tools. That's the foundational argument. Now let's talk about EMP, because that's the word you hear thrown around a lot in this conversation, and most people don't actually understand what they're talking about. I'm going to give it to you straight, based on what the documented research actually says. An electromagnetic pulse is a burst of electromagnetic energy. It can come from a nuclear detonation at high altitude, from a solar coronal mass ejection, or from a purpose-built EMP weapon. The 2004 EMP Commission Report, that's a real document produced for the U.S. Congress, specifically addressed the vulnerability of civilian infrastructure, including vehicles. The report distinguished between the three components of an EMP event. They called them E1, E2, and E3. E1 is the fast, intense pulse that damages solid-state electronics. That's the one that fries circuit boards, microprocessors, and engine control units. E2 is more like lightning, similar in character, and most surge protection handles it. E3 is a slow, long-duration wave that damages power grid infrastructure. The vulnerability of modern vehicles lies almost entirely in their exposure to the E1 component. Modern ECUs are solid-state microprocessors. They operate on millivolt-level signals. An induced voltage spike from a nearby EMP event doesn't have to be massive to destroy the gate junctions in those chips. The physics is simple and it's documented. The Commission's testing found that vehicles from the 1970s and early 1980s showed significantly less vulnerability than modern vehicles. That result shouldn't surprise any mechanic. A 1976 Chevy truck running a Rochester carburetor doesn't have a microprocessor controlling fuel delivery. There is no ECU to damage. The ignition system runs on points and condenser, or by that era, a simple electronic ignition module with no microprocessor. A carbureted engine manages air-fuel mixture through purely mechanical means. The carburetor is a precision mechanical instrument: jets, needles, floats, and venturis. Air moves through, fuel is metered by physics, the engine runs. No computer involved. If an EMP kills the battery in the ignition coil, you've got a problem. but a spare ignition module costs $40 and fits in a Faraday cage the size of a shoebox. That's why the prepper community, and increasingly off-grid ranchers and serious rural buyers, are specifically hunting pre-1996 trucks. They want the mechanical simplicity. They want a vehicle that can be repaired with parts from a hardware store if necessary. And they want to sleep easy knowing that a software update from a manufacturer they'll never meet can't strand them on the side of a road. Let me walk you through the specific trucks that make the list. These are the trucks I'm talking about when I say no computer or minimal computer. And I'll be precise because the details matter when you're going shopping. First on the list is the 1973 to 1987 Chevrolet CK series. That's the square body generation. These are probably the most common pre-computer half-ton trucks still on the road in America, and there's a reason for that. The 350 small block V8 in these trucks is one of the most documented, most supported, most parts available engines in the history of the automobile. Through 1987, most of these trucks ran carbureted engines. The early 1980s saw Chevy experiment with throttle body injection on some configurations, but carbureted variants were available throughout the run. The electrical system in a 1978 C10, for example, is brutally simple. You have a battery, an alternator, a fuse box you can read with your eyes, and basic wiring that you can trace with your hands. The ignition went to an HEI distributor in 1975. That's a self-contained unit with the coil built in, and it's electronic in that it uses a module instead of points, but there is no microprocessor. It's a solid-state trigger, not a computer. The square-body Chevy is also cheap to keep alive because production numbers were massive. These trucks sold by the millions. The aftermarket support is enormous. You can buy a new carb, a new distributor, a complete brake system, all of it, from Summit Racing or Rock Auto, and have it on your porch in 2 days. Second on the list is the 1973 to 1979 Ford F-Series. That's the 10th generation, the last of the true round-body Fords before they went to the box fender look in 1980. These trucks are climbing in price fast. The combination of collector appeal and mechanical simplicity is driving that. Ford's 360 and 390 FE engines from this era are carbureted, robust, and well documented. The 400 Cleveland and the 351 Windsor were also available through this generation. None of these engines have fuel injection. None of them have an ECU. The ignition is a Duraspark system. Again, electronic in that it's solid state, but no microprocessor in the loop. The 1980 through 1986 F-Series trucks are also worth considering, but you need to pay attention to the specific engine and trim. By the mid-1980s, Ford was offering EFI on some configurations, specifically the 302 with fuel injection in certain years. If you're chasing simplicity, you want the carbureted 300 inline-six or the carbureted V8 variants from those years. The 306 is a bulletproof engine, torquey, reliable, easy to work on, and carbureted through the end of its run. Third on the list, the 1972 to 1993 Dodge W Series. These are the four-wheel drive Dodge trucks. The W Series designation means four-wheel drive. The D Series was two-wheel drive. These trucks have a loyal following for good reason. The Dodge 318 and 360 polyspherical and LA Series engines are carbureted workhorses. Dodge kept these trucks carbureted longer than most manufacturers, which is part of why the late model W Series trucks are interesting. A 1988 Dodge W150 with the 318 and a Carter or Holley carburetor is simpler than a 1988 Chevy that might have come from the factory with throttle body injection. Parts availability on Dodge trucks from this era is slightly less robust than Chevy or Ford, but the engines are so similar to the Chrysler B-block engines used in muscle cars that the hot rod aftermarket keeps parts flowing. You can rebuild a 318 with off-the-shelf components. Fourth, the Toyota Land Cruiser FJ40 and FJ55. Now, these aren't trucks in the American half-ton sense, but I'm putting them on this list because they show up in the prepper conversation constantly, and they deserve mention. The FJ40 ran from 1960 through 1984. The FJ55 wagon ran from 1967 through 1980. Both models use Toyota's F-Series and two F-Series inline-six engines, which are carbureted throughout their production run. The 2F in particular, available in FJ40s from 1975 through 1984, is a cast iron, mechanically injected carbureted engine that is essentially unkillable with proper maintenance. These vehicles are in demand worldwide. Parts supply is global because these trucks were used as work vehicles in developing countries for decades. That means third-party parts are available from multiple continents. The FJ40 specifically has appreciated dramatically in price. Clean, running examples now sell for $60,000 to $90,000 or more at auction. Rough running project trucks are still in the $15,000 to $30,000 range depending on condition. If you're buying one for utility rather than collection, you want to verify the frame and floor. Rust is the enemy on these, same as any old truck. Fifth, the early diesel options, specifically the 6.2-liter GM diesel. This engine was offered in Chevy and GMC trucks and Suburbans from 1982 through 1993. It is mechanically injected, meaning the fuel delivery system is a Stanadyne mechanical injection pump. No electronics controlling fuel quantity or timing. It's governed by mechanical means. The 6.2-liter diesel is not a performance engine. It makes modest horsepower, around 130 horsepower in most configurations, but it's thrifty on fuel. It runs on diesel that can be stored long-term more easily than gasoline, and it has essentially no electronics in the fuel system. The glow plug system is the most complex electrical component in the equation, and that's a simple timer circuit. The 6.2 has a known weakness. The connecting rod bolts are undersized for the engine's power potential. You never boost these engines, never add more fuel without also addressing that bottom end. But in stock form, treated well, a 6.2 diesel in a square-body Suburban or K-Series truck is a serious long-haul proposition. I need to be honest with you about something because this is where a lot of the YouTube prepper content goes wrong. When people say these trucks have no computers, they mean it in a relative and practical sense. They do not mean it literally. Let me be clear about what's actually in there. The HEI ignition module in a mid-1970s Chevy truck is a solid-state electronic component. It can be damaged by EMP. It is not a microprocessor, but it is a transistor-based circuit. It can fail. It costs about $15 and you can carry 3 spares in a Ziploc bag. The voltage regulator on these trucks is also electronic in some configurations. Third-party solid-state regulators came into use in the mid-1970s. Again, not a microprocessor, but an electronic component. Replaceable, cheap, simple. What these trucks do not have is an engine control unit, a microprocessor managing fuel delivery, spark timing, and emissions functions in real time. They do not have a transmission control module. They do not have a CAN bus network running signals between modules. They don't have an anti-lock brake controller, a traction control system, or an electronic stability program. None of that exists. So when preppers say EMP resistant, they mean that the most vulnerable component, the solid-state microprocessor ECU, is absent. The remaining electronics are simpler, more robust to induced voltage, and easily replaceable. That's the real argument, and it holds up under scrutiny. If you want to truly harden a pre-1976 truck with points and condenser ignition, you're getting close to eliminating all the vulnerable electronics entirely. A 1969 F100 with a carburetor and an old point-style distributor has almost nothing that an EMP can destroy. The coil is inductive, not solid state. The points are mechanical. The only question is whether the battery and alternator survive, and those can be tested and replaced. Let me talk about where the market is right now because the price data is real and it's moving fast. Barrett-Jackson auction results from 2022 through 2024 consistently show pre-1980 American trucks selling above their 2019 valuations by significant margins. A clean 1977 Chevy C10 that might have sold for $8,000 in 2019 is now crossing $15,000 to $18,000 at auction in good driver condition. Fully restored examples are going for $30,000 and up. Bring a Trailer, the online auction platform, tracks this data in real time. Their completed auction records show square-body Chevy trucks appreciating roughly 15% to 20% annually over the past 3 years. That's not stock market volatility. That's consistent, demand-driven appreciation. The buyers are a mix of collectors, off-grid enthusiasts, and working truck buyers who are simply tired of repair bills on modern vehicles. The Ford market is similar. Clean 10th generation F-Series trucks, 73 to 79, are climbing. The Ranger package and Lariat package trucks command premiums. But even plain Jane work trucks are selling faster and higher than they were 5 years ago. The Dodge W-Series trucks are slightly lagging the Chevy and Ford markets, which means right now they might represent the best value on this list. A running, driving 1980s Dodge W150 with a 318 and a 4-speed is still findable in the $5,000 to $10,000 range if you shop locally in agricultural areas. That window is closing, but it's still open. The FJ40 market is essentially already closed for budget buyers. These are collector vehicles at this point. If you're buying an FJ40 as a working truck for utility purposes, you're spending serious money. Where to shop? Craigslist in rural areas is still the best source for working man trucks at working man prices. Facebook Marketplace in agricultural states, Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Eastern Washington, you'll find trucks that have lived hard lives but are mechanically honest. Bring a trailer for anything you're planning to restore or keep. Barrett Jackson if you want a finished example and you're prepared to pay retail or above. Here's the part that separates the guys who get a good truck from the guys who get a project. What to look for mechanically when you're buying a 40-year-old truck. Rust is the killer, not surface rust. Surface rust is normal on these trucks and manageable. The rust that kills a truck is structural. Check the frame rails under the cab, specifically the section directly behind the front axle and under the cab corners. That's where these trucks collect moisture and rust from the inside out. Poke it with a screwdriver. If it goes through, walk away. Floor rust is cosmetic on the surface but often indicates deeper structural issues. Pull the carpet, pull the rubber mats, and look at the actual floor metal. Rockers, the pinch welds and body panels below the doors, are commonly rusted and expensive to replace properly. The steering box on these trucks wears out. The recirculating ball steering boxes used on square body Chevys and same-era Fords develop excess play with age and miles. Grab the steering wheel and rock it side to side at a stop. If you can move it more than 2 inches before the wheels respond, the box needs attention. New replacement boxes are available and not expensive, but you need to know what you're getting into. Brake systems on these old trucks are often neglected. The front disc and rear drum setup on 1970s trucks is simple, but needs fresh rubber. Check the brake hoses, the flexible hoses at each corner. These crack from age. 40-year-old hoses can collapse internally, creating a one-way valve that locks up individual corners. Replace all 4 flexible hoses as a matter of course on any truck this age. The carburetor condition tells you a lot about how the truck was maintained. A carburetor that's been sitting with fuel in it for years gets varnished internally. You can rebuild them. The kits are cheap. But a gummed-up carb on a truck that supposedly runs fine is a sign that basic maintenance may have been deferred across the board. On the 6.2 diesel truck specifically, pull the valve cover if you can and look at the rocker arms. Oil starvation at the top end is a common failure mode. If the rocker arms look dry, scored, or discolored from heat, the engine has been run low on oil or with degraded oil. That's a buyer beware sign. On any of these trucks, bring a code reader, and I mean that ironically. These trucks don't have OBD ports. What you bring is a compression gauge. Do a compression test before you buy. On a 350 small block, you want at least 130 psi on all cylinders, with no more than 10% variation between cylinders. Anything below 100 psi on a cylinder indicates wear or damage. That test tells you the honest story of the engine better than anything else. Now let me tell you something about the practical reality of owning one of these trucks daily, because some of you are thinking about this as a daily driver, not just a prepper insurance policy. These trucks drive differently than modern trucks. The steering is heavy compared to modern power steering setups. The brakes require more pedal effort. The suspension is not tuned for comfort. These were work vehicles. Highway cruising at 70 miles an hour is louder, less refined, and more physical than any modern truck. The fuel economy is honest, which is to say, it's bad by modern standards. A carbureted 350 and a half-ton Chevy from 1978 is going to get somewhere between 12 and 16 miles per gallon, depending on condition, tune, and how you drive. If you're comparing that to a modern EcoBoost F-150 that manages 20 on the highway, yes, it's a real difference. Parts availability is excellent for the common engines and platforms I've mentioned. But time matters. When you need a part for a modern truck, you go to the dealer or AutoZone and it's there. For these trucks, you may wait a few days for shipping. In a true emergency situation, the question is whether you've pre-stocked the consumable parts. Smart owners of these trucks keep a shelf of common spares: ignition module, water pump, thermostat, fuel pump, carburetor rebuild kit, belts, hoses. That last point is actually one of the strongest arguments for these trucks as preparedness vehicles. You can stock everything you need to keep one running for 10 years in a space smaller than a hall closet. Try doing that for a 2022 F-150 with a 10-speed automatic and a turbocharged 4-cylinder with direct injection and variable valve timing. People ask me if I actually own one of these trucks. I do. I've had a 1979 K10 Chevy for 11 years. 350 small block Rochester Quadrajet carburetor, 4-speed manual, Dana 60 front axle. I've driven it hard, I've used it for work, and I've kept a log of every repair over those 11 years. The total mechanical spend over 11 years, not counting tires, oil, and fuel, has been under $3,000. Carburetor rebuild, new brake lines, replaced the water pump twice, did a front wheel bearing, fixed the steering column. That's it, nothing else. A comparable modern truck at those miles would have touched the transmission at minimum, and possibly the turbo, the injectors, and multiple sensors. The argument for these trucks is not nostalgia, it's economics and repairability. The prepper angle is real, but it's one part of a larger picture. Simple trucks are cheaper to operate, cheaper to repair, and can be maintained by an ordinary person with ordinary tools. If you're starting from zero on this, meaning you don't own one of these trucks yet and you're thinking about it, here's my practical advice. Start with the square body Chevy. The part support is unmatched, the learning curve is gentle, and a running driver quality truck is still findable at a reasonable price if you shop in the right places. Learn the platform. Buy a factory service manual. They're available as reprints. Read it. You'll understand more about how trucks work after reading that manual than most people who've driven trucks their whole lives. If you want diesel, look at the 6.2 GM in a Suburban or a 3/4-ton truck. More cargo capacity, longer range, and the fuel stability advantage for storage. Be prepared for the learning curve on diesel maintenance. It's different from gasoline, but not harder. If you're in the Pacific Northwest or the upper Midwest and rust is a serious concern, look harder at Western trucks. Trucks that spent their lives in dry climates. A Nevada or Arizona square body will be straighter underneath than anything from the Rust Belt. Do not buy anything sight unseen without a pre-purchase inspection by a trusted mechanic. Pay for it. $200 for an inspection is cheap insurance on a $10,000 purchase. Before I let you go, I want to be straight with you about one more thing. The demand for these trucks is real, and it is accelerating. The people I'm seeing buy them are not all preppers. They're farmers who are tired of dealer repair appointments for sensor failures on modern trucks. They're small business owners who need a work truck they can fix themselves. They're younger buyers who want something simple and real. The supply of clean, unrusted, mechanically sound examples from this era is finite. These trucks are 40 to 50 years old. Every year, more of them rust out, get wrecked, or get parted out. The ones that survive in good condition become rarer. The price data reflects that. This is not a bubble. It's supply and demand on a fixed and shrinking supply. If you've been thinking about getting one, the time to act is sooner rather than later. Not because I'm trying to sell you anything. I'm just a mechanic who reads the market. The window where you can buy a solid square body Chevy for under $10,000 is closing. Same for the good Ford F-Series trucks. If you got value out of this video, and I mean real, usable information you can take to a truck lot or an auction, the best thing you can do is subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. I put out content like this every week. Real truck knowledge, no sponsored garbage, no dealership talking points. Just what I know from 32 years of turning wrenches. Subscribe and stick around. I'll keep giving you the straight story. That's the no computer list. You know what it is, you know why it matters, you know what to look for, and you know where the market is heading. Now go find your truck.